Every great Western needs a good murder. A dusty street, a shadowy figure, a smoking gun. It's the engine that drives the story. So when I was asked to write a script about Wichita's cowtown days, I went looking for one. And I thought I'd found the perfect candidate. A bloody shootout, a notorious outlaw, a classic frontier justice story, the kind of tale that builds a town's legend. But as I started to piece the story together, a real mystery emerged, a much stranger one. It wasn't about the murder, it was about what came after. It felt like the city's most violent history. The very stories that should have defined it as the wickedest town in the West had just vanished. The bodies weren't just buried, it was like the graves themselves had been erased. The real mystery wasn't who got killed, but why the city decided to forget. This is the story of that investigation. To understand what's missing, first you have to understand the myth. Picture it, the 1870s, Wichita, Kansas. For a brief, explosive period, this place was the end of the legendary Chisholm Trail. After months on the trail, thousands of tired, young, and rowdy cowboys would pour into the city with their herds, ready to get paid and blow off some steam. The city's population exploded. Saloons and gambling halls sprouted up to meet the demand. By 1872, the city was crawling with them. Some counts say as many as 14. This was a boomtown in every sense of the word, a chaotic crossroads where the wild, untamed spirit of the open range slammed into the encroaching forces of commerce and civilization. It was a place that needed tough men to keep the peace. Figures like Wyatt Earp walked these streets, serving as a city policeman tasked with managing the boisterous crowds and enforcing local laws. This is the image we have, a quintessential cowtown, buzzing with danger and opportunity, a place ripe with stories of gunfights, feuds, and frontier justice. So when I started my research, I expected to be drowning in them. I went to the archives, I dug through old newspaper records, and I looked for that quintessential Wichita murder. And I found surprisingly little. Not nothing, of course. There are records of violence. In May of 1874, a workman named Charles Sanders was shot and killed on Main Street in bloody sunlight. The local paper described how a dozen revolvers were pulled in the chaos that followed. But these stories don't define the city's identity. They feel like footnotes. There's no famous defining gunfight like the OK Corral, even though all the ingredients were there. In fact, other Kansas cowtowns like Newton have more famous shootouts, like the bloody gunfight at Hyde Clark in 1871. Instead, the official narrative of Wichita, the story it tells about itself, pivots. It highlights the commerce of the cattle trade, the ingenuity of the early settlers, and then, very quickly, it moves on. It becomes the story of grain elevators and business, and then the story of aviation, the air capital of the world. It's a fascinating history, but it feels clean, polished. The grit and the blood of the cowtown era seem to have been scrubbed away. Why? That became the new script. So my first question was Wichita really that violent? The answer is almost certainly yes. Anytime you have a massive influx of young men with cash, alcohol, and firearms, you're going to have violence. These weren't just quiet frontier towns, they were flashpoints. One contemporary account from 1874 details an incident where a policeman tried to disarm a man, only to have a dozen others draw their weapons on him. The alarm was sounded, and 40 to 50 armed citizens, a sort of secret police, had to be called in to restore order. This wasn't an anomaly, it was the reality of the streets. So, the violence was there, but my investigation uncovered something else, something that points to why we don't remember it. A deliberate and powerful effort to control it. Almost as soon as they were incorporated, towns like Wichita passed strict gun control ordinances. Prominent signs at the town limits ordered visitors to leave your revolvers at police headquarters and get a check. One ordinance declared it unlawful for any person to carry deadly weapons, concealed or otherwise, within the city limits. Wyatt Earp wasn't just chasing outlaws, he was enforcing gun control, disarming cowboys who flouted the law. This wasn't about disarming the whole population. Owning a gun was a necessity for survival on the plains. This was about public safety, and more importantly, about business. The city leaders, the merchants, the people building permanent homes, they all understood that a reputation for unchecked violence was bad for the bottom line. They needed to attract families and stable commerce, not just transient, rowdy cowboys. The saloons and gambling halls were tolerated because they were licensed and taxed, but the violence that came with them had to be contained. This leads us to the death of the cowtown itself. The era was surprisingly short. By the late 1870s, the writing was on the wall. The very thing that created the cowtown, the railroad, was also what would kill it. As rail networks expanded further south into Texas, the need for grueling 800-mile cattle drives to Kansas just disappeared. At the same time, two other factors sealed the deal. First, the invention of barbed wire began to close the open range, making those massive, free-roaming cattle drives nearly impossible. Ranching was becoming more contained. Second, and maybe most crucial for Kansas, was the fear of Texas fever, a tick-borne disease carried by longhorns that was devastating to local cattle breeds. Farmers started blocking herds, and by 1885, Kansas outright banned Texas cattle from crossing its border, effectively severing the Chisholm Trail at the source. The party was over. So the history didn't just vanish, it was buried, and it was buried on purpose. The missing body I was looking for wasn't a person, it was the entire violent, chaotic soul of the cowtown era. The end of the cattle drives gave Wichita a choice. It could cling to its wild past, or it could build a new identity. City leaders chose the future. They had spent years trying to tame the violence with ordinances and policing, trying to prove they were a place of law and order. Now they had the chance to fully rebrand. The rowdy cowboys were gone, the streets were quieter, and the focus shifted entirely to respectable industries: farming, grain storage, manufacturing, and eventually the aviation industry that would define the city in the 20th century. Think about it from their perspective. You're trying to attract investors from the East Coast. You want families to put down roots. Are you going to sell them on the town where shootouts happened on Main Street? Or are you going to sell them on the peerless princess of the plains, a hub of commerce and forward-thinking industry? The choice is obvious. The wild, bloody stories of the cowtown era became a liability. They were bad for business. So the narrative was sanitized. The city consciously and unconsciously began to tell a different story about itself. The focus shifted to the economic boom, the hardy pioneers in civic development. Wyatt Earp's time here is remembered, but more as a footnote about a famous guy who passed through, not as evidence of a town so unruly it needed legendary lawmen to tame it. The Old Cowtown Museum in Wichita, a fantastic living history museum, works to present an authentic picture of daily life, but it has to fight against the sensationalized Hollywood myths of the West. The real story isn't about a single murder. It's the story of a civic reinvention so successful that it almost completely erased the chapter that came before it. The city didn't just move on from its violent past, it actively suppressed it, sanding down the rough edges until a smoother, more palatable history remained. The missing body is the memory of the violence itself, sacrificed for the sake of progress. So what started as a search for a simple murder script uncovered a much deeper story about how cities are made and how history is written. It's a reminder that the past we inherit is rarely the whole story. It's a curated collection of memories chosen for a purpose. The stories that get told are the ones that serve the present, and the ones that don't, the ones that are inconvenient or unflattering, are quietly left behind in unmarked graves. Wichita isn't unique. Nearly every town has its ghosts and its forgotten chapters. The real treasure finds when you start digging past the official narrative, looking for the stories that have been paved over. That's where you find the truth. So if this investigation into Wichita's missing history sparked your curiosity, help others discover it by giving this a like and a share. And for more journeys into the forgotten corners of history, make sure to subscribe. Let me know in the comments what forgotten stories your own hometown might be hiding.